Sounds good.
Hello everybody, welcome to another Live Art Tuesday at the Red Deer Museum and Art Gallery. My name is Saija, I'll be your host, and today we also have one of our summer camp instructors with us. Jason, you want to say hello?
Hi.
And so today's project will be called a visual investigation. And so just a little bit of context, the name of the project, the type of project we're going to be doing today is called a total information drawing. And so what a total information drawing is, it draws a little bit more from the tradition of scientific illustration, where we will not only be drawing our subject matter, which is a pear, but you will also be documenting as much information about your subject as possible. So I'll show you the demo that I have prepped here. So again, I did this picture of a pear, but instead of just drawing the pear, I've also, for instance, made a little color palette here, indicating what colors can be found on the pear. I found this really interesting little note doing some research about pears, that there are over 3,000 different kinds of pears. I used some stamps to add some descriptive words about the pear. So it's a fruit, they're sweet, they're crisp, and I wrote the name of it. And I also used some artistic license to just add some shadows, some different textures, just to make it a little more visually appealing. But basically the goal of this project is to document as much information about your subject matter as you possibly can. So let's get started. We are going to begin with just laying kind of a fun background out. And so one of the things that I like to use to add some more texture and interest is cut up pieces of kraft paper. And so we can just take these pieces that we've torn. Oh, sorry, usually I go through a quick run through of the materials. I know that we put them at the beginning of the video, so I'll just do a quick run through. You need a piece of watercolor paper. You want to have some ripped up pieces of scrap kraft paper. You can use scrapbook paper, patterned paper. I just like brown, so any kind of visually interesting paper that you have handy. You will need a subject to draw from. So again, we have these pears. You're going to need some watercolor brushes, a little vessel of water. You're going to want a piece of paper towel just to kind of like smudge some of your background. You'll want probably just one color of a chalk pastel. I've chosen these little peach ones. You'll need oil pastels, scissors, you want glue, a pencil, a Sharpie, and if you really want to add some more fun bits to it and just some different kind of like text, you can use some rubber stamps in the shape of letters or pictures if that suits you, and some stamp pads. All right, so this is a pretty materials intensive project. So if you don't have every single type of material that we've got, don't worry about it. This is a project that you can improvise with. So back to the demo. We're going to be starting by ripping and gluing some of that kraft paper down. And so once you get it in a place you like, just start applying glue. Don't be shy about it, just get that glue on there. And if you're finding that you have a little bit of overlap, just glue it to the back of your paper. So I'm flipping it over, I'm adding a little bit of glue to the edges where it's sticking out, and I'm just folding it over the back there so we get a nice clean fold along the back of our sheet of paper. And I think I want to add one to my bottom corner as well. And now again, for this step, it doesn't have to be brown paper. You can be using scrapbook paper, old newspaper that you're done reading might also be a good option. So really anything that you have handy to kind of add a little bit of collage effect to the background will do you nicely. All right, so I've got my bits of craft paper here. I've got one little corner I'd like to glue down a tiny bit more. So once you're happy with your collage portion, you can take a chalk pastel, and chalk pastels are really nice because you can sort of blend them and just have a very, very subtle background color. And I really like to use the peach for this project because it's not overbearing and it contrasts really nicely with the pear that we're going to be drawing. So as you can see, I'm just using the broad side of my pastel and just pulling it across the page. I'm not too worried about going end to end and covering the entire paper. I'm just kind of making a focal point. And what a focal, well, not a focal point, but I'm preparing a background for my focal point. So your focal point is the main portion of your piece of art that draws the focus to it. But I can start using layers to build up to a focal point by having them go closer and closer towards the center of my piece of artwork. And so now you can either use your hands or a piece of paper towel, tissue paper, whatever you have, to just really blend that chalk pastel. Ooh. Careful that you don't breathe it in while you're doing this. I definitely just got a snoot full of chalk pastel and it wasn't great, so hold your breath. How are things going over on your end, Jason?
Very good.
Awesome. There you go. I can't stand the texture of chalk pastel, but you know, again, it's really up to the individual artist. So as you can see now, we have these nice, really soft backgrounds. If you feel like you want to add a little bit more, you're welcome to do that. But again, this is pretty individual. All right, so now we can jump into the main part, which is looking at our subject matter. So I'm looking at this pear, and the things I want you to notice while you're looking at your pear are, where does the light hit it? So at where I'm holding it in the camera, I've got kind of a light bit here. I want you to also notice the shape of it, the outline. And when you're looking at a piece of fruit, you're going to notice that it's not all one uniform color. So uniform meaning it is the same all the way through. You're going to notice that it's a little more green up top here, a little more yellow here, maybe almost a bit yellowish, reddish brown on the bottom. So I'm looking at my pear. And if you're comfortable, you can jump right in with pastels, but I recommend using a pencil first. So I'm going to decide where on my page I want my pear to be. So I'm kind of going to go for just ever so slightly to the left of the middle of my page. And I want this to be the biggest thing on my page. So I'm going to draw the outline of my pear while I'm looking at it. I'm going to give it a funny little stem. So right now we are just focusing on the outline. And again, you don't have to be using a pear for this. It could be an apple. It could be anything. You could, perhaps you found a really interesting piece of wood outside and you want to take some notes on what kind of tree it came from, what kind of leaves it has. So really use your imagination. Pick anything that is interesting to you and that you feel confident drawing, and give it a go. Okay, so I have the outline of my pear. And I've got a few options from here. If you want, again, you can use your computer or phone to get some information and kind of think about how you're going to place information on your page. However, I am going to jump into adding some color and some shading to my pear because, again, this is my main subject matter. So I'm noticing that the stem is brown and it gets a little darker in some places. So I'm going to use a tiny bit of black to add the shadows there. And I'm noticing that I've got some greens on the go, some yellows. It's going to be a touch of red and a little bit of brown because those are the colors I'm seeing. Again, we're really working on our observation skills here. And so oil pastels, again, you can blend them by layering them. And what I am choosing to do is actually just, I'm going to kind of lightly go over the whole thing in yellow first. And you might be wondering, why am I doing that? Because I mentioned green, I mentioned brown, I mentioned all of these other colors, but here I am going in with just yellow. But that's because even the greens in this pear have a little bit of a yellow tint to them. And so by adding a little bit of yellow all over the pear, when I go in to add my greens, there's going to be this uniform yellowness underlying it, and it's going to work out really nicely. So I'm adding that in. And now I'm going to go in with my green and you'll kind of get an idea of what I'm saying. And not only that, but it's going to give us some really nice texture, adding the green over the yellow. So if any of you who are watching have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them in the chat. I can see them and I will occasionally glance over and answer your questions.
Way too small.
Oh, that's okay. Just a tiny pear. That's okay. Maybe you can write some paragraphs about the pear. Ah, terrible jokes. Some paragraphs.
Score one for saying.
We here at the museum like to make dad jokes. Do you want to actually hold up your art piece, Jason, just to show our viewers what we've got going here?
Absolutely.
So
mine is a lot smaller.
He mentioned that he made it a lot smaller, but this can be a creative choice if you so choose to make it smaller. Maybe you want to focus more on the writing aspect and like the kind of typography that you can add to your piece. So again, as I always kind of remind you guys, there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do it. However, that is also why we work in pencil, because if you say you did make it small and you didn't want to run with it and work that way, you always have the option of erasing. Or you can, you know, add other things to create that visual balance. So again, like Bob Ross says, happy accidents. You can always come up with something creative and work with how your piece goes. So as I'm working, you can see how I'm blending different colors, and I'm really not scared to just like layer in with all kinds of different colors. As you can see, I've got 2 different yellows on the go, and I'm even going in there with a bit of green. And it's giving me a nice gradual mix of colors. A gradient, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, is when you have one color fading into another. And so this can be achieved with oil pastels by just layering them one on top of the other and seeing the colors mix together. Another fun technique that you can use with oil pastels is if you have some shading to do in a darker color, but you don't want the dark parts to be overbearing on the rest of your piece, is you can sort of see what I did with the brown is I lightly kind of rubbed it over an area and then took my lighter yellow and we just went right over that brown. So they blend together, but it doesn't overpower the other light colors that we have in the pear. And I'm gonna give the top of my pear some little brown freckles because there's a little bit of kind of spotting up top. And I really want to emphasize that because it looks neat. It's a cool detail. All right, so I am pretty happy with how my pear looks. I'm gonna add a little dash of red towards the bottom because there's kind of some of those like little details in there. And now what I want to be thinking about is information about what I've drawn. So one of the things I really like to start with is doing a color palette to indicate which colors I have used to draw it. And so to do that, I'm actually just going to make a couple of little scribbly blocks like this. And again, yours don't have to look scribbly like mine. If you want to make them very like tight boxes of color, that works too. So you can see I've made my little color palette here. And now I'm going to take my trusty Sharpie and make little notes. So I've got light green highlights. Some light yellow, some dark yellow. Some brown. And a touch of red. Now something else I think I'd like to do with this piece is incorporate a little bit of watercolor because I really like the look of using watercolor and butting it up against oil pastel because they're very different visual textures. So you know what we do with watercolor, we wet our brush, swish it around in the water, and if you'd like you can do some wet on wet by adding a little bit of water underneath your pear. I'm going to add some shadows just to make it look a little bit, give it a bit more depth, make it look a little more three-dimensional. And so again, the wet on wet technique, we've gone over this in lots of our live arts, but for those who haven't seen those before, perhaps if this is your first time tuning in, wet on wet is a technique where you wet the paper prior to adding any paint to it, and what it does is it helps your watercolor paint flow a little more freely. And so I'm adding, and I'm pretty loose with my brush work here. I'm not really worrying too much about being super fine detailed. And if you end up having some spots that look a little more dry brushed, that's okay too. All kinds of different textures add more to this particular piece. So the more the better. I'm even going to deepen the shadow a tiny bit with some black. And I do want to create a larger title for this just because it is a total information drawing. And, you know, if you're looking at an entry for, you know, an illustration of a plant or an animal in really old scientific illustration, or even if you're just looking at any book, the title that indicates what you're looking at is pretty important. So I want to create a nice title for my pair, and I want to add a little bit of focus to it. So I'm going to go up here, and I'm using watercolor to add sort of a gentle green header up here. And before I add my title, I'm just going to let that dry momentarily. And it shouldn't take too long because watercolor just does not take too long to dry, which is quite handy for our purposes today. Jason's still working on his, so I'm going to bring up his screen so you can kind of see how his project is going. Cool, cool. I'm liking the shading under the pear. Very pronounced. Good stuff. All right, and now my watercolor has dried, so I'm going to, so for this one you can use your black, you can use a black oil pastel, you can use your Sharpie, whatever it is you want to use to make your pear, or your title. It's gonna say pear. And so I've also decided to write the title of it in 2 different languages because I also speak French. So the French word for pear is poire. You do not have to do this. However, if you speak different languages, it could be cool to add the name of your subject matter in different languages. Do you speak any other languages, Jason?
I do not.
You do not. All right. So feel free to write whatever you are comfortable writing for this. There is nothing wrong with just doing it in English.
Still not quite dry enough.
That is all good. So I've got my title written down. So what we can both do while you're waiting for yours to dry is we're actually on our last step, which is just going to be adding any notes that we want with Sharpie or with stamps, letter stamps.
Can you steal your black pastel, please?
Yes. There you go.
Thank you.
So I can also take, oh, I think these ink pads are, they're running out, but we're gonna do our best. So I'm gonna just stamp some letters. I got the letters for pear. For my initial project that I showed you at the beginning, I had a little more time. So I grabbed letters for other words that describe the pear, like crisp, juicy, sweet, and fruit. But we're on a little bit more of a time budget today, so I just grabbed a couple of stamps.
My ink pad is nice and charged if you wish to use it.
Oh, that's all good. I've got mine working, but I am glad yours is working because these are on their last legs. I grabbed a second one that might be a little better too. I kind of figured I might need a backup. Ah, my second one seems to be working a little bit better. So yeah, just kind of any visual details that you want to add through stamps is kind of a fun way to add a bit more to it. I'm going to add the note as well about 3,000 different kinds of pears because I just thought that was really cool. That is so many different kinds of pears, you guys. Apparently. Oh, we are just so punny today. Ooh, I'll also make a note that they grow on trees.
Yeah, don't leaf that one out.
Don't leaf that one out. All right, so and again, you can also add descriptive words. You can add facts. You can add, like the scientific name for it if you find it. So anything that you want to add to this project that is going to describe what you've drawn is excellent. All right, so by the end of it, you should have something that looks like this, a really richly textured, visually interesting, but also educational multimedia piece of artwork. So that's our visual investigation because we were investigating the subject matter in the deepest way possible. So Jason's showing you, oh, whoop, you bring that back up. Jason's showing you his, looking good. And I'm just going to quickly show you what we're going to do next week. So next week I will have another guest with me, and we will be doing these lovely watercolor prairie garden beds. Nice and simple. You won't need as many materials next time. Sorry if I overloaded you guys a bit. So this is next week's project. And if you would like to see any of our other previous live art streams, you can visit us at www.reddeermuseum.com and go under the heading that says blog. You will find all of our past projects there. We're also on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook at Red Deer Museum. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.